In 18th century Europe, the fate of empires rested in the hands of two extraordinary women, Marie Antoinette of France and Catherine the Great of Russia. They ruled in an age when monarchs wielded absolute power, yet each queen's life was defined by secrets, scandals, and betrayals. One was notorious for her extravagance, the other celebrated as a fearless reformer. But were they really so different? What truths and sacrifices lay beneath the crowns? And how did their reigns ultimately shape history and seal their fates in ways few could predict? This is the story of an era where power was everything, and the price for it was high, especially for women in power. Both Marie Antoinette and Catherine the Great faced relentless pressures and a world ready to judge them. While one queen met a tragic end at the hands of revolution, the other died in power, her legacy complex and enduring. This is more than a story of two queens, it's a tale of survival, ambition, and the shifting tides of history. To understand who they truly were, we must go back to the beginning, to the worlds that forged them, and uncover how their paths as queens began. Our story begins in the mid-18th century, in two very different parts of Europe, each with its own unique culture, political intrigues, and expectations for royalty. In Vienna, Austria, Marie Antoinette was born into the powerful Habsburg dynasty. She was the 15th child of Empress Maria Theresa, one of Europe's most formidable rulers, who had one goal for her daughter: to secure an alliance with France, the historic rival of Austria. From a young age, Marie Antoinette was groomed to embody grace and diplomacy. But beneath the carefully orchestrated elegance, she was still a young girl caught in the wheels of European power. At just 14 years old, Marie Antoinette was sent to Versailles to marry the future King of France, Louis XVI. As she crossed the French border, she was stripped of her Austrian belongings, even her beloved dog, to ensure she would enter French court a pure French princess. But adapting to life at Versailles was no easy feat. The French court was a place of endless intrigue, opulence, and competition. Every dress, every gesture, every friendship was scrutinized, and Marie quickly realized that her every move would be watched. Meanwhile, in a small German principality, a young girl named Sophia was also being prepared for a royal future, though her path was less clear. Sophia's family held only minor noble status, but her intelligence and determination set her apart. She was ambitious from the start, studying history, philosophy, and languages, and forming her own ideas about leadership. Then came the opportunity that would change her life. She was chosen to marry the heir to the Russian throne, a move orchestrated by Russia's Empress Elizabeth, who sought a compliant bride for her nephew, Peter. When she arrived in Russia, Sophia took the Orthodox faith and adopted the name Catherine. But she soon discovered her new husband, Peter III, was unfit to rule, immature, erratic, and far more interested in Prussian military drills than his own empire. Peter was despised by the Russian nobility. Catherine saw this as her chance to shape Russia in a way that aligned with her vision, a vision of modernization, education, and cultural revival. Unlike Marie, who was finding herself isolated in Versailles, Catherine was slowly gaining the support of powerful allies within the Russian court. As these young women stepped onto the grand stages of France and Russia, each faced the harsh realities of their new lives. Marie Antoinette was thrust into a world where appearance and image were everything, and where the slightest misstep could spark whispers or rumors that traveled all the way to the king himself. But with no political power of her own, she was expected to play the part of a charming, submissive queen, more of a decorative symbol than a leader. Catherine, however, would not be content with the limitations of her role. She began to court influential nobles and military leaders, building a loyal base that would one day allow her to take the throne by force. Her ambition grew as she saw how Peter's ineptitude was leading Russia into chaos, and she was determined to become more than just a pawn in the imperial game. So, as Marie Antoinette struggled with the pressures of French court life, Catherine the Great was already plotting a bold and dangerous move, one that would see her seize power and change Russia forever. While their paths seemed so different, the weight of expectation was crushing for both. And though they could not have known it then, the choices they made in their early years would set each on a collision course with destiny. With their positions as queens now firmly in place, Marie Antoinette and Catherine the Great faced a reality far more complex than any courtly fairy tale. Both women were thrust into worlds where their authority was constantly tested, where allies and adversaries blurred together, and where every decision had consequences, not just for themselves, but for the nations they ruled. In France, Marie Antoinette's role as queen was largely ceremonial. She wasn't given political influence, and the French court expected her to be more of a symbol than a leader. But for Marie, This symbolic role came with enormous pressure. Versailles was a microcosm of French society, filled with ambitious nobles, spies, and courtiers eager to climb the social ladder. The young queen, who initially loved the opulence and charm of court life, soon found herself tangled in its web of politics and rumors. Her every move was dissected, whether it was her fashion choices, friendships, or her struggles to produce an heir with her husband, King Louis XVI. These early years at court were isolating for Marie, as she began to be seen by the public as an outsider. Though she tried to endear herself to the French people, her lavish lifestyle began to attract criticism. Her love of extravagant gowns, jewelry, and the construction of the infamous Petit Trianon, her personal retreat at Versailles, only fueled gossip. With France's economy faltering and people suffering, Marie's spending made her a target of public outrage. She became the face of the monarchy's excesses, even though much of her behavior was standard for royalty of the time. Meanwhile, in Russia, Catherine's trials were more perilous, and her ambitions far greater. She was not content with a passive role beside her husband, Peter III, whose erratic behavior and unpopular policies made him a threat to Russia's stability. Peter openly admired Russia's enemies, even adopting Prussian customs that alienated the Russian nobility and military. For Catherine, this presented both a challenge and an opportunity. She was determined to take power not just for herself, but to reshape Russia into a more enlightened, modernized empire. However, to do so, she would need to rally supporters willing to risk everything to see her on the throne. With a strategic mind and relentless ambition, Catherine quietly began gathering a coalition of military leaders, nobles, and political allies who shared her discontent with Peter's rule. She became a master of secrecy and persuasion, carefully positioning herself as the only viable option for Russia's future. In 1762, when Peter's erratic behavior reached new heights, Catherine saw her chance. She orchestrated a coup that would be both swift and bloodless, at least initially. With the backing of the powerful imperial guard, she deposed Peter and declared herself Empress of Russia. Days later, Peter was mysteriously killed while in captivity, a reminder of the ruthless lengths Catherine was willing to go to secure her rule. Back in France, Marie Antoinette faced her own battles, though of a different kind. With no political control, she could only observe as France slid deeper into economic turmoil, its people increasingly resentful of the monarchy. To escape the pressures of public life, Marie retreated into the Petit Trianon, where she lived a life that seemed almost removed from the harsh realities outside Versailles. Here, she indulged in a simpler pastoral fantasy, hosting private gatherings and dressing in peasant-inspired attire that seemed almost mocking to the French people. What Marie saw as an escape became yet another point of criticism, as rumors spread that she was completely detached from the suffering of her subjects. Catherine, in contrast, actively shaped her empire, enacting sweeping reforms that transformed Russia's cultural and political landscape. She modernized the Russian economy, reorganized the government, and opened new schools, bringing ideas from the European Enlightenment into the heart of her empire. Yet her reforms often came at a cost. To maintain the support of the nobility, she granted them even greater power over the serfs, deepening Russia's rigid social divide. Her legacy as a reformer was marked by this contradiction. She expanded freedoms for some while tightening control over others. For Marie Antoinette, every attempt to engage with the public seemed to backfire. She commissioned charitable works and even took part in social welfare projects, but her gestures were met with skepticism. By the late 1780s, as revolution loomed, Marie was trapped between the rigid expectations of her royal role and the growing fury of the French people. She became an unwilling symbol of all that was wrong with the monarchy, a role that, unlike Catherine's, she never sought. In the end, both queens faced relentless trials on their thrones, but their responses could not have been more different. Catherine wielded her power with calculated ambition, embracing the throne with an iron grip. Marie, on the other hand, struggled under the weight of a role she could not control, trapped by the expectations of both the court and the people. Yet, as we'll see, neither was immune to the heavy costs of ruling, costs that would ultimately determine their fates. By the height of their reigns, Marie Antoinette and Catherine the Great had each come to embody different kinds of power. For Catherine, power was something to be wielded with strategic intent, used to shape Russia according to her vision. For Marie, it was a burden of expectations, one she could never fully escape no matter how she tried to redefine it. Catherine's rule over Russia was marked by an insatiable drive for reform. Inspired by the ideas of the Enlightenment, she corresponded with European philosophers like Voltaire and Diderot, absorbing their ideas and adapting them to her own agenda. She sought to expand Russia's influence and bring about a cultural renaissance within her empire. Under her rule, she established new schools, expanded the library network, and invested in the arts, bringing European sophistication to the Russian court. Her reforms included modernizing the economy, creating an infrastructure that supported trade, and establishing a legal code to address Russia's vast and diverse population. She even attempted to draft a new constitution, a bold move in an era where monarchs ruled with near absolute power. But Catherine's influence extended beyond her borders as well. Through a combination of military campaigns and diplomatic maneuvers, she expanded Russian territory, securing Crimea and parts of Poland, which gave Russia strategic access to the Black Sea. These conquests not only showcased her military strength, but also solidified her status as one of the most formidable rulers of her time. Yet, while her vision for Russia's future was progressive in many ways, it was also deeply selective. To keep the nobility loyal, she granted them increased power over the serfs, creating a divide that left millions in poverty and bondage. This contradiction defined Catherine's legacy, a modernizer who reinforced the very systems that kept her people oppressed. Meanwhile, Marie Antoinette's influence was more symbolic than political, but it was powerful nonetheless. Through fashion, lifestyle, and culture, she became an icon, not just for France but for all of Europe. Known as Madame Deficit for her extravagant spending, Marie's choices were scrutinized and often exaggerated. Her elaborate hairstyles, luxurious gowns, and bold jewelry set trends that resonated beyond the French court, sparking imitations across Europe. What began as expressions of her personal taste soon became statements that others took as symbols of excess. The more the French public struggled, the more Marie's image became a source of resentment, an emblem of the monarchy's distance from reality. But Marie wasn't entirely blind to the kingdom's struggles. She tried to influence the king's decisions, pushing for a stronger response to France's financial crisis and advocating for changes that could improve the lives of the French people. Her involvement, however, was constrained by the rigid roles of the French court, where women, especially foreign-born queens, were not meant to have political opinions. And even when she attempted acts of charity, they were met with suspicion. Her intentions, whether genuine or influenced by her advisors, could never overcome her image as a foreigner, a frivolous queen who cared more about her pleasures than the welfare of France. As France teetered on the brink of revolution, Marie's image grew darker. Rumors and slander circulated widely, her supposed affairs, her disregard for the common people, and of course the infamous phrase, "let them eat cake," which she likely never said. To the public, she became a symbol of everything wrong with the monarchy, an emblem of luxury, while France's poor struggled to survive. In trying to find her own form of expression within the constraints of royalty, Marie inadvertently fed the resentment of a nation on the edge of collapse. Catherine, on the other hand, knew precisely how to leverage her power and reputation. She cultivated an image of herself as a philosopher queen, even commissioning portraits that depicted her as wise, poised, and dignified, a stark contrast to the scandalous rumors that haunted Marie. She maintained control over her image and her court, and while there were whispers of her private liaisons, she took steps to ensure these stories did not eclipse her public accomplishments. For Catherine, power was a tool to expand her empire, modernize her society, and secure her legacy as a ruler in her own right. For Marie, power was a paradox, something she had in name but not in influence. Each woman's approach reflected her circumstances. Catherine, the ruler by choice, embraced authority with confidence, while Marie, the queen by arrangement, struggled to fit into the expectations imposed on her. In the end, Catherine and Marie's contrasting approaches to power made them icons, but in vastly different ways. Catherine's name would be celebrated for centuries as a symbol of Russia's golden age, while Marie's legacy became a tragic tale of luxury, scandal, and a revolution that would end her life. Both women's reigns were marked by their decisions, some calculated, others shaped by circumstance, and as we'll see, these decisions would eventually lead them to drastically different fates. Despite their vastly different approaches to power, both Marie Antoinette and Catherine the Great were no strangers to scandal. For these queens, controversy wasn't just a backdrop, it became a defining element of their public images, and in both cases, the rumors often outshined reality. For Catherine, the rumors surrounding her personal life were infamous even during her lifetime. Known for her intelligence and ambition, She was also reputed for her romantic liaisons, many of which became public knowledge. Catherine had a series of high-profile lovers, some of whom were significantly younger and politically influential. While in many courts these relationships would be hidden or dismissed, Catherine openly granted her lovers titles, lands, and even military power, raising eyebrows both within Russia and abroad. To her critics, these relationships were evidence of moral corruption, and stories of her insatiable appetite circulated widely. In truth, Catherine's political savvy often intersected with her personal life, as she used these relationships to secure alliances, loyalty, and support for her rule. But even her clever maneuvers couldn't stop the more salacious tales, stories that hinted at everything from promiscuity to wild myths about her private life that would persist long after her death. Meanwhile, Marie Antoinette's scandals were less about personal relationships and more about the image she projected. In the eyes of the French public, she embodied the monarchy's extravagant lifestyle, and this perception only grew more extreme as France's financial crisis worsened. Her love for lavish gowns, elaborate hairstyles, and exclusive parties was seen as proof of her detachment from reality. Perhaps the most infamous controversy of her life was the affair of the diamond necklace, a scandal that didn't even involve her directly, but had a lasting impact on her reputation. In this bizarre incident, a group of schemers forged Marie's signature to buy an outrageously expensive necklace and planned to pin the debt on her. When the scandal broke, the public was quick to believe Marie's involvement, seeing it as just another example of her indulgent spending. Although she was innocent, the damage to her reputation was irreversible. The affair of the diamond necklace solidified her image as a queen out of touch with her people, a belief that would fuel revolutionary fervor in the years to come. As the revolutions approached, the scandals surrounding both queens took on lives of their own. For Marie, every rumor and every accusation painted her as a villain. The phrase, "let them eat cake," though likely never spoken by her, became emblematic of her supposed disdain for the suffering of her people. The French pamphlets of the time were filled with caricatures of her as a heartless, frivolous monarch, and her Austrian origins only made her more suspect in the eyes of her subjects. In the years leading up to the revolution, Marie was portrayed as a foreigner who cared more about her own pleasures than the welfare of France. In truth, she was largely powerless to influence the political system that placed her in such a role. But to the public, she was the face of everything wrong with the monarchy. Catherine, by contrast, managed to control much of her public image. Though whispers of scandal and impropriety surrounded her, she was careful to ensure that her accomplishments overshadowed her private life. She positioned herself as a philosopher on the throne, a ruler driven by reason and progress. While the Russian nobility might have been aware of her personal choices, they valued her leadership too much to challenge her authority publicly. But even Catherine couldn't escape every controversy. Her treatment of the serfs, granting the nobility unchecked power over them, led to significant unrest, culminating in the largest peasant uprising in Russian history, the Pugachev Rebellion. This revolt shook Catherine's rule, forcing her to confront the consequences of her policies. Her initial response was one of reform, but when the rebellion grew too dangerous, she crushed it with brutal force, signaling that even her enlightened ideals had limits when it came to maintaining order. In the end, both women became cautionary tales of royal excess in the eyes of their people. For Catherine, the scandals were mostly controlled, and her public image remained one of strength and wisdom despite the rumors. For Marie, the controversies became her undoing, creating a tidal wave of resentment that would lead to her tragic fate. These scandals didn't just shape their lives, they etched their names into history as two of the most controversial figures of their time. But as we'll see next, while Catherine's reign would end in strength, Marie's would end in the jaws of revolution. As the tides of history turned, the reigns of Marie Antoinette and Catherine the Great were nearing their final chapters. But their fates could not have been more different. For Marie Antoinette, the end came swiftly and brutally. The revolution she had long feared finally erupted in France in 1789, fueled by anger over inequality, poverty, and the monarchy's perceived indifference to the suffering of the people. The royal family's attempts to escape the turmoil only made matters worse. In 1791, Marie and Louis XVI tried to flee France, hoping to find refuge with loyal supporters. But they were captured, brought back to Paris, and placed under house arrest. This failed escape shattered any remaining trust the public had in their queen, cementing her image as a traitor to the revolution. The monarchy was officially abolished in 1792, and Louis was executed soon after. Marie Antoinette was left to face her fate alone, and the revolutionary government subjected her to a humiliating trial. She was accused of everything from high treason to personal immorality, charges often based on wild rumors rather than facts. She stood before the court not just as a queen, but as a symbol of everything the revolution sought to destroy. Despite her dignified defense, she was found guilty and sentenced to death. On October 16, 1793, Marie Antoinette was led to the guillotine, her once lavish lifestyle replaced by a tattered dress and cropped hair. In her final moments, she displayed a quiet strength, reportedly apologizing to the executioner after stepping on his foot, a small gesture that captured the tragic fall of a queen, once celebrated for her grace. Her execution marked a turning point in the French Revolution, sending a powerful message about the fate of those who seemed to symbolize excess and detachment from the people's suffering. Catherine the Great's final years were a stark contrast. She continued to rule Russia with an iron grip, even as age began to take its toll. Having survived political enemies, military uprisings, and court intrigue, Catherine was at the height of her power when she died of a stroke in 1796. She had spent over 3 decades on the throne, transforming Russia into a formidable European empire. At her death, Catherine left behind a legacy of expansion, cultural advancement, and modernization. Unlike Marie, whose life ended in public disgrace, Catherine's death was met with a mixture of admiration and respect. Her execution marked a turning point in the French Revolution, sending a powerful message about the fate of those who seemed to symbolize excess and detachment from the people's suffering. Catherine the Great's final years were a stark contrast. She continued to rule Russia with an iron grip, even as age began to take its toll. Having survived political enemies, military uprisings, and court intrigue, Catherine was at the height of her power when she died of a stroke in 1796. She had spent over 3 decades on the throne, transforming Russia into a formidable European empire. At her death, Catherine left behind a legacy of expansion, cultural advancement, and modernization. Unlike Marie, whose life ended in public disgrace, Catherine's death was met with a mixture of admiration and respect. Yet, Catherine's legacy was complicated. Though she was celebrated for her enlightened reforms, she had also perpetuated a system that oppressed millions of Russian serfs. Her vision for Russia included a brighter future, but she preserved the rigid social hierarchy that kept much of her population in poverty. To this day, Catherine is remembered as both a visionary ruler and a figure of contradiction, an enlightened despot who pursued progress on her terms alone. Today, Marie Antoinette and Catherine the Great remain 2 of history's most captivating figures, each a symbol of vastly different kinds of power and legacy. Marie Antoinette is often remembered for her tragic fall, a queen whose life of opulence became a cautionary tale when revolution struck. Over time, she has been reimagined, sometimes even sympathetically, as a victim of circumstance, a young woman thrust into a role far beyond her control. Catherine the Great, on the other hand, is often hailed as a ruler who left an indelible mark on Russia's cultural and political landscape. Her reign represents a complex legacy, blending progress and oppression. She is celebrated for her intellectual pursuits and ambition, yet she also upheld systems of inequality that would continue to impact Russia for generations. Both queens embody the contrasts of power, the allure, the ambition, and the inevitable consequences. As we look back on their lives, we're reminded that history often judges figures by the worlds they leave behind. Marie and Catherine ruled in a time when queens walked a fine line between glory and tragedy, and in the end, their legacies are a testament to the power and peril of being a woman on the throne.